about how is it going to impact the dissertation process? Are you actually trying to look to use AI to actually write your dissertation for you? If so, if you're interested in these types of things, you definitely don't want to miss this episode of Done Dissertation from ABD to PhD show. I'm your host, Dr. Ron Goings, founder of Done Dissertation, where we demystify the dissertation process so that doctoral students can write and defend their dissertation in 1 year or less. This show from ABD to PhD is all about providing strategy on one, how to navigate the dissertation process and prepare for life as doctors. So on these episodes, you will hear me by myself, as well as having some resident experts to come in and talk with you about their own work, their academic journey, and all the things they've been able to do with their research and writings after they have earned their doctorate. And in today's episode, I am really, really honored to have a great person here who I've seen really do some amazing work. And I'm really interested in having this conversation about artificial intelligence and its role as we think through the future in terms of higher education and even, doctoral programs. And we have Dr. Cecelia Parnther, who is an assistant professor of administrative and instructional leadership in the School of Education at St. John's University. Dr. Parnther, how are you doing today?
Doing so well. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to having this conversation. And one thing we always like to do on the show is, a lot of folks see people with their doctorates and they just sometimes get envious and like, how are they able to do those things? But we all don't start out like that. And so I always like to go back in time to kind of allow folks and our listeners to understand the journey of the guests on the show. And so if you can, like, was getting a doctorate and doing what you're doing now as a professor always something you wanted to do? Like, what was the journey getting to this point? Like, as a student, even K through 12, were you always saying, hey, I'm going to get this doctorate and that's going to be my goal? So tell me a little bit about kind of how you thought back then based on what you're
So,
going to do.
the doctorate was probably the furthest thing from my mind. I actually went to college. I was expected to go to college or join the military. I'm a first gen college student with a supportive family who knew that higher education was going to be the key to upward mobility. And so I listened to those stories and I was trying to figure it out the best way that I could. It was actually the director for the Center for Black Culture and Research at the time at West Virginia University who she's the type of person who if you see her you stand up a little straighter and you look her in the eye and she fills you with confidence and she started to ask if I was planning on applying for graduate school. And no one had ever asked me that. I had not considered what that might look like. So I actually applied and got nervous. I was so convinced that although I had gotten in, and I'm mildly embarrassed to say, although I had secured funding, I thought that they would see right through me and
Mm-hmm.
believe that I didn't belong there. So I
Right.
actually didn't go. And so I moved into education and did some teaching, was laid off due to some budget cuts, worked a few odd jobs at a dating center, a weight loss center, Target. And I started to go back into higher ed. I was a hall director. And long story short, I started directing a program at a for profit college and got in touch with a mentor who said, you can go to graduate school and get some of the theory behind all of the things that you were doing. And so I went back into grad school and that was for my master's.
Okay.
Still, you're still powering through. And so I started my career in staff and administration and academic affairs, student conduct, things of that nature. And it got to a point where the conversations around advancement and that different trajectory required a terminal degree. And I
Yeah.
recognized that I wanted to be more research oriented. And so that's when all of a sudden this became first a consideration, then I had to convince myself that it could be a reality. So it actually, I've spent much more time not even considering a PhD than
Sure.
actually having a PhD.
So what made you make the turn? Because I know, a number of folks in our audience might be looking at doctoral programs or even just in them and realizing that like, or feeling like they don't belong. So what made you say, all right, I'm going to actually just, just apply and actually show up and get into this program?
I saw folks who were doing things that I truly believed that I was capable of doing, but I didn't have access to those spaces because I didn't have that credential. And
Mhm.
you get to a point where you have enough experience and the skills and the language, and you're making a choice. Do I continue where I am and feel comfortable and safe, or do I take this leap because I want something different? And so for me, it just got to the point where what I wanted for myself professionally required me to take some risks. And for me, that risk was starting a program.
So when you first, got into your doctoral program and, started taking classes, what was that transition like? I know you talked about being apprehensive about starting. So now that you
Mhm.
start, what is it like when you're first starting your program?
Whew. So I am a parent, and I had a two-ish, 2.5-year old, and
Boy,
I
okay.
had an 8-week old.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
And first, I had approached it like I would my job. So for context, I was a full-time student. I was a doc associate, and so I would do the doc associate. Baby would sit on sit on me while I had my laptop, and I was reading and playing with the toddler. And I was very I was very organized because professionally, that's how I make sense of my work. Um, I was very nervous. I was nervous. I felt like um, someone would realize that perhaps, I didn't have what it takes, but I was also very hungry. And I felt like if I had the opportunity that I really wanted to make the most of it. So I, I took the I took a prerequisite, for example, of a class because I felt like having that background knowledge would help me to feel more
Sure.
confident. I attended office hours. I met with a writing coach and got involved with the grad college at my university because I wanted to have access to as many resources as possible. And I was also really fortunate to be supported by um, just some amazing faculty. And I promised
Yeah.
myself that if I had the opportunity to pay it forward, that I'd spend my career doing it.
No, I love that. And so I want to touch back on something you mentioned about this being organized. So what did that organization look like? Because I know a lot of students trying to figure out how do I stay organized in this process. And so like what did your organization structure look like?
So for me, any of us who start a doctoral program, at some point, you were good at school. And so it was kind of tapping into making sense of what I needed to do differently. So for me, it's looking at my time management. So
Mhm.
when I knew how to read a textbook, for example, maybe I would allot a certain amount of time to that. For me, I knew that scholarly articles were going to take a bit longer. And so once I received a syllabus, for example, I would actually put into the calendar, okay, yes, this is the time that I have class, but where are the times where I am going to say, I'm investing in reading to further understand this topic, where I can study. Studying was different than trying to write. Writing was different than trying to brainstorm um, ideas for really every aspect of the dissertation. And so for me, I needed to compartmentalize that time and keep myself honest about how much time I was spending doing the activities versus how much time I was, on Google
Yeah.
or, any of those procrastination activities that we have.
No, that makes sense. And so, as you figure out, you had your system rolling, and then, you get through your coursework, and then we get, starting to think about what do you want to do your research on. And so, like, what was that process to go from like, I'm a student trying to figure it out to like actually developing and conceptualizing your dissertation? Like, what was that journey like for you in terms of how did you arrive at your topic initially?
Sure. So because I had spent so much time around academic integrity and conduct, I knew that I wanted something that I felt like where I could feel like I shared my expertise, but also that aligned with things that I was passionate about. And for me, that converged by understanding that I am very passionate about making sure that students learn in ways that feel authentic to them, and that they learn how to learn by including all of those voices that, might look like them or that they grew up with, that we recognize how to pay attention to those things differently. And so for me, it was doing this background information because, yes, I had the practical chops, but in my role, there was no time to read the most current literature, right? So I had to spend time reacquainting myself with some of the theory, and then really understanding what is this one small thing I can add to the conversation, right? It wasn't, I don't think I've ever believed that, oh, you're uncovering this huge gap. Like at our
Right.
best, we are adding to the conversation.
Yeah.
And so what's that one thing that I just want folks to consider and know? And that was something that I really had to get to. I think advisors will challenge you, so that you can articulate that in a really honest way. Because I think one of the first things that we do is we try to just show all that we know. And it's important that we remember that we are in these spaces and in these rooms for a reason. And even if you don't fully believe it yourself, knowing that you are there and what you represent and your unique contribution matter, and to really just engage in the process and have the conversation. We're wrong so much more than we're right. But what I've learned through the process is it's allowed me to think so much more deeply.
No, I love that. And one thing I want to go back to, just even like the topic with academic integrity, what got you started? Because that's not something someone says, necessarily like, oh, I'm going to focus on integrity. Like, was this something just in your maybe job role that you thought, oh, this would be a great addition to? Or was it something that you were just always interested in, like academic integrity was your thing?
So, being in student conduct, you have a different perspective sometimes because of what you're dealing with so much in higher ed. Like
Sure.
there were sad things. While there were great learning opportunities, like ultimately, you want education, but you're hearing day in and day out just some really challenging things.
Yeah.
And in the academic area, for me, it was a chance to connect kind of student success and academic affairs. I found a lot of happiness in helping both faculty to make sure that we were communicating policies in specific ways and supporting them in that, but also communicating those things to students, mentoring students. And what I came across is that a lot of the literature, it was really focused on this gentleman's code, quite frankly.
Mhm.
It focused on the Ivy League. It focused on the elite private institutions.
Sure.
And that wasn't my experience. I was in these places, but I wasn't of that experience. And so I continued to think, why aren't we having these conversations? We want everyone to have this be an additional opportunity to learn how to think well, think critically, and think in ways that bring in values that you grew up with,
Right.
that matter to you, so that you can share that. And so my focus was actually on diverse populations and community colleges, um, because that's where the majority of our students
Yeah.
start or finish.
Yeah.
And it was the best when you look at the diversity of faculty, when you look at the diversity of the student bodies. I feel like it was a really great opportunity to dig into how the values that are being taught and kind of how we teach to different populations.
No, I love that. And so, you have your topic focused on community colleges. And so talk to me about your dissertation and what you found from doing that work in terms of your findings. And we'll start there, then I have some other follow-up questions from there.
Sure. So I talked to community college faculty, a series of interviews, but also I used a national survey instrument. And so what I learned from the faculty is that for some professions, what academic integrity really is about. And academic integrity is always about this, right? But I really want to talk about us centering mutual trust, irrespective of who is in the space. So one interview in particular like really stands out to me. And although this was it's qualitatively dominant, but it was mixed methods. But this interview was of a faculty department lead who was in emergency medical services. And he described it to me as recognizing that the person who's sitting next to you, that partner, is helping you to be responsible for saving a life. And you have to trust that they've also done the work so that when you need them to take over, when you need them to administer that life-saving care, that you don't have to wonder if they did the work or if they had the ability to think critically, and that they also don't have to wonder about you. And so a lot of it was around community building and trust. I also learned from other folks the many things that they're up against, that part-time faculty are sometimes making a decision between whether they're able to keep all of their positions and remain quiet when they know that there are opportunities to enhance the learning experience, or say something and be at risk of, financial precarity or worse. Um, Overall, faculty know that there are issues. There are variances in the way that folks approach it, but what they need is they need support, but there's a call for accountability there that came out very saliently. Um, and that is that we are really a reflection of the types of things that we want to teach. If I come to you um, as a Black woman, and I don't feel as though the literature that I am sharing within the context of my classes speaks to my experience in a way that I can authentically share that information, or if I haven't been able to make sense of it, then there's always going to be like this filter that then transfers to students. And those students are then not seeing the benefit of our authentic voices. And so what is our responsibility on making sure that there's that representation, that we're
Yeah.
acknowledging different ways of expression, and that we're thinking critically. It's not just these folks are not in the room, because we all have to make those decisions, right? And they're not easy ones. But it is our ability to value maybe what we've missed, maybe what we don't know, and recognize that there are different ways to view assessment, and there are different ways to acknowledge, yes, this student absolutely gets it. And what work do I need to do so that I can fully appreciate the way that they've made sense of a given phenomenon or experience? Honestly, it is so important and such an urgent need in
Yes.
higher education, because students who see themselves, they want to stay. And we have an obligation to do everything that we can to create conditions that help them stay.
No, that is very true, and something I want to even backtrack a little bit. Even thinking about your research study, there's some folks that are listeners that are either preparing to write their dissertation, like in that beginning phase, and now you talk about doing a mixed method study, right? And so, what were the considerations you had to keep in mind when you were like designing that study? Because now you're going from a national sample, study of a national sample with the quant to a more, I don't know if it's one campus based qualitative component or multiple campuses. Like, what was that process like, conceptualize a study like that? Because there might be people trying to do mixed methods, and I see a lot of people doing it
Yes.
wrong. So I would love to hear your thoughts
Ooh,
on how you
yes.
conceptualize.
So let me first say that it would not be my first choice.
Okay, got you.
If I were to go back again, I'm just going to be very blunt with you. But I also am a firm
Why
believer.
so?
Why is that?
Why do you
Because
think so?
I think that when you're learning to become an independent researcher, and you're really coming through this problem statement and methodology, and the choices that you make and want to explain and justify are so important. And And sometimes I think it's hard to, it isn't just looking at this through multiple lenses. It's where are the synergies? How do these things talk to each other? At what times do they talk to each other? And so logistically, I just encourage folks to look at the goals that they have, but more importantly, look at the research questions that they're asking. My research questions required that I look at these elements together, but also at different times. It was very timed. There Another element was a document analysis that had looked at policy language over a period of 10 years. This had consequences for me. It means it took me longer because not only did I have to make sense of those elements, but then I've got to justify how, in what order, and why they were
Every last
essential.
thing. That's crazy.
That was something I felt was worth the time, but I think we all have to be honest with our.
No, it's so
Yeah.
true in terms of just being honest with how much time that you have to dedicate to a project. And that sounds like that's 3 steps. So now that's a whole nother layer with the document analysis piece that could take a long time. So
Yes.
I'm glad you gave yourself the time to do that. But a lot of students, I would agree with you. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And I see a lot of students who are not strong in one of the research areas that still want to do it. I'm just like, this is not the time to try to figure it out. Let's do that later on, and then you can come back and add on to, you can develop that skill set later. But I think a lot of students are missing out.
Absolutely. There is nothing wrong with having a very nice future research section. You just want to do it as well as you can and in service to those research questions.
Yes. No, I agree.
But we
And
have
so,
lives. We have bills to pay.
right.
We have goals, and some of those are timed. And I think it's okay to be honest about that and respond accordingly, so that there is some strategy. And Dr. Goings, you're the expert in that area. So I'll defer to you, but they're really part of that organization. Kind of getting back to that is saying, I have this goal in mind. Here's what I know about my relationship with my advisor, my chair. Here's what I know about myself and how quickly I read and organize. And here's how much time I can realistically dedicate. And then you backward map so that you've also made space for the hiccups that come. And it's not surprising. Some things will be disappointing. That's the process. Some things will be exhilarating, but you want to make sure that you've just made peace with your decisions. And so I would see folks who were, you get your little graduation sign on the door for your defense, and I attend defenses, and I was so happy for folks. And there were these little pangs, but I knew that I wanted to do something in a really specific way in service to the work that I had been doing, and it served me well.
Yeah, you're on point with just the backwards mapping. We try to teach people all the time, like, first things first, have a plan. And that's what we have an event called Design Your Done Dissertation to help people develop the plan to backwards map the process. Because if you don't have a plan, you don't even know what your target is. And but I think, as you mentioned, and you were willing to do this, a lot of students sometimes are not. And so this is my advice for students, is that you have to be willing to be flexible with those deadlines, because as you mentioned, things will pop up. Folks get sick, family stuff happens, just life. And that will
Yes.
really impact your timeline. I just literally had a conversation with a client today, right before this recording, about that. About this idea that what he wanted to do is different than how his timeline is going to actually work out. And he came to a realization, like, I have to be okay with that and just move on. But I'm glad that you
Yes.
were able to do so and figure it all out. And so as you finished your dissertation, what was your thoughts about life after? Because on the show, we want to talk about not only getting through that process, but like what was your thoughts, as you were finishing up, about what did you want to do career-wise with the doctorate? Like, where did you see things moving forward for yourself?
So when I went in, as I was making decisions early on, I made the decision that I was interested in becoming a faculty. And so to do that, I made, first of all, stating your intention. And so I stated my intentions to my advisors. I stated my intentions to mentors. I didn't have folks who I knew in this space, but I knew what I wanted to do. And there were some folks who told me, "Oh, you need to just go back into administration, do this, do that." And I get it. Everyone comes from a place of their own experience, but I knew what I wanted. And I had some great folks tell me, if you want to do this, you need to be joining research opportunities. You need to be engaging in publication and professional development through presentations. You need to share your research with the academic community. Um, Outside of the classroom and with friends and colleagues, I'm actually a bit of an introvert. So some of those things felt really hard and really difficult. I had done them for work, but I really had to approach it in the same way. Like, I'm investing in what I want my future to be, which means that I needed to go, and if I had a question or I wanted to share my appreciation for an article or something like that,
Right.
I did that. But it was definitely being pushed out of my comfort zone. And again, we talk about whether or not we feel like we belong. Sometimes we have to fake it.
That's a 100%
Sometimes you have to
yes.
take that deep breath and say, "You know what? I'm here."
Yeah.
You've made this investment, whether you have funding or not. You've come out of pocket in some way. You take time away from your family. You take time away from your friends, away from those hobbies. Like, you need to make the most of it. And so that meant putting on my big girl pants and taking that deep breath and going up to folks and introducing myself. Um, and I found so many people to just be so supportive
Yeah.
and willing to share and engage. And it really helped because I felt less alone.
Yeah. You need a community. I think that's really a big piece. I even think that's how we met. If I remember right, I think somebody connected us via email when you were first
Yes.
starting as a professor, I believe. I can't recall. It's a little some time
Yes,
has
I remember it was my first year. And again, I have a friend and mentor, and I was just like, okay, I want to connect and be a support where I can, but also absorb
Sure. Yeah.
anything that I can. I want to learn. And Dr. Goings, you were just so kind and generous with just having conversations. And I'll share this. There was one point I was sitting on a manuscript, and I don't know
Yep.
if you remember this, but you were
Yeah.
just like, just submit the manuscript. And I did that thing, that really tentative, "Oh yeah, I'll submit it. I've got some more thing." You were just like, "Well, what happens if you just submit the manuscript? Like, today? Is it formatted? Is it grammatically sound?" And it was. And I submitted it, and it moved forward. I received a revise and resubmit, and I resubmitted, and it was accepted. And I'm telling you, had we not had that conversation, it would still be in my Dropbox
Oh,
to
no.
this day.
Yeah.
I promise. Because it takes it, I think this was the same way with the doctoral program,
Yeah.
just in general. You have to flex those muscles and get used to being prepared to receive feedback, accepting the feedback for what it is. You have to be willing to share your authentic voice to engage in independent research, no matter what your end goal is, because that's who we are, right? That's our brand. And fortunately, I had folks who were willing to gently and regularly remind me. And you said, "Let me know when you said, like, let me know when you send that
Yeah.
email."
Some
And I'm glad you
accountability.
did, because I would have continued that pause. Those things make such a difference. And when you do win, I'd also just encourage folks to be that support for other people. When you make that breakthrough, pay it forward, because for everything that you think you're struggling through, there are countless folks who are dreaming of having the opportunity.
That's a
And
fact.
it makes a difference. And the fact that you show up every day is a testament that your work is needed, your perspective is needed, your energy is needed.
Yeah, I hope people catch that, because that is really important. A lot of us get so caught up in the mental aspect, like, oh, this is not good enough, or all these things. There's a lot of just being behind the scenes now and kind of seeing how it all, what did they say, how the sausage was made. Like now seeing how it really happens, I'm like, there's a lot of subpar stuff going on. And it's like, get your work out there and then, let it be what it's going to be. But a lot of people get so caught up with, it's not in the lane, or it's not as well written as their famous, celebrity scholar in their particular area, and they get caught up in all those types of things and don't submit. So hope people learn that lesson.
Can we visit that for a minute? Because just to be very blunt, doubling back to what you said, first of all, think about, there is someone that everybody knows with this title who you think is absolutely ridiculous, and you cannot believe that they could do it, and use that as motivation. Like, as messy as that sounds, if they can do it, why not you?
Yeah.
Like, why not you? You have sat in countless meetings where you're just like, I cannot believe that this is the thing. Like, keep that energy, because those are the things that in the hard times can help you to remember why you set this goal in the first place. Why are folks just out here oblivious, having these opportunities if you're sitting right here? Right. And that's not competition, that's motivation. So I'll say that. Yeah. The next thing is, I personally believe the best dissertations are those that are able to be defended successfully and those that are understood.
Facts.
We have this idea, I've had this idea that scholarly writing should take on these forms, and we let that consume us. And so we craft these sentences and paragraphs that we think sound really smart. But unfortunately, as sometimes we are crafting those things, we worry so much about what we don't feel good about, we lose just that really pure meaning. If you've come into this to, offer your voice to some aspect of an issue or problem in education, and the folks who could most benefit from your findings cannot read it, and I'm not saying they're going to read your dissertation, but if they cannot understand what your problem is or your purpose or why it's important, then who are we writing for? That's the authentic writing. It's why I am so passionate about my research agenda, is because we have to be okay. All of those things are gatekeeping mechanisms.
Yeah.
All of those things were designed so that there are folks who believe they can have these conversations in a certain way, and they don't have to worry about the folks who are speaking to as many people as possible. But when we speak to as many people as possible and they understand us, these are opportunities for not just publication. These are opportunities for change. These are opportunities to allow other folks to come to the conversation.
Yeah. And I think the missing piece, a lot of times people don't recognize that. They just think they have to do with what they've seen. So it's hard. Some people aren't willing to take a step out and be slightly different to reach people in a particular way. Yeah, I even get that with done dissertation. Like, people are like, why are you doing that when you're a faculty? I'm like, I could do both. Like, it's not hard. Like, y'all, come on now. Like, you can be very successful as a researcher and take the work that you're doing and teach it to other people so that they can get it and make it easy. But like you said, not everybody has that. That's a mindset thing, though, I think, for a lot of folks. So
it also serves you well, and you also want to be able to present that information.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, a president of a university or a superintendent does not have time to pull out a thesaurus and figure out what you said. Like, they want to know how this addresses a problem that they're dealing with, because they don't have time. And the people who are able to meet their career goals are the ones who find that problem and speak to how we can solve it.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that. And with that, before I want to talk about your research, but real quick, I do want to talk about, because you are now on the opposite side. Now you are chairing dissertations and you're seeing the opposite side of research from your perspective. So I would love to hear, just for our audience who are doc students, what are some, mistakes that you might see doc students making when like working with their chair? Because now you're on the other side. Like, what are some things that you might see how they're like maybe messing up that relationship. Because I say if I had to say what things get in the way of students that we reach out to, it's usually the chair student interaction is one, and then something usually around writing, maybe the literature review is number two. But that chair piece I think is really important. So I'd love to get
Mhm.
your perspective as a chair, like what can students be thinking through in order to have a better working relationship?
Absolutely. So I think some of it is just understanding the role of your chair. And so for me, um, as a chair, I want a student to feel like I want to do everything that I can to be in your corner. When you are sharing your expertise, when you're defending your proposal, defending your dissertation, I want to be the person, I want to be your hype person. I want to know that the decisions that you have made are backed by your expertise, they're backed by that literature, and we have the evidence. That means that we have to trust each other. I have to trust that you're going to put words on the page, that while we may have differences of opinion in terms of feedback and in terms of the way that content is presented, but I have to trust that together you recognize that I am offering feedback in service to your vision and that this is not something that I consider my project. But I also have to trust that when you say that you're going to do something, that you're going to do it. I have to trust that you will believe that if I cannot give you the resource, that I will help you find it. And I think one of the things that happens is there are folks who feel beat down. Maybe they've had bad experiences in the past. Maybe they're dealing with their own stuff. They aren't feeling so confident. And sometimes that anxiety and fear play out in different ways. So I shared the story about not going to graduate school the first time. I missed out on a completely funded program at a major research university because of my fear. And, I didn't take that to
Mm.
anyone. And while I am so happy with the path that was designed for me, the
Sure.
reality is I made a terrible choice for no other reason than I did not believe in myself.
Mm.
And if you've spent all this money and made this investment, you need to continue to invest in yourself. So that's the big thing is, and if you don't have that trust, let's figure out why. Is there, that personality thing? Do we have someone on your committee who's that content supporter and expert,
Yeah.
methodological supporter and expert, and just all around good person who you need to have in your corner? Being strategic about how you set that up because you might not find it all in one. You might, but
But
more
usually,
likely than not, more likely than not, you're putting that together. So being intentional about that. The second thing that comes up a lot is folks don't invest in themselves. So for context, I am in a program where I have many doctoral students and I want to support all of them. So I keep good notes and I make editing and things like that. But at the end of the day, I want you to feel like your dissertation is that biggest investment when we meet.
yeah.
If you are somebody who has trouble because you're not constantly having that face-to-face accountability and you have not organized yourself and put that time in the calendar, that meeting's going to come and you aren't going to have words on the page. And there is nothing that I can do in our advisement meeting that's going to make you feel closer to being prepared because I can't give you feedback on something that isn't written. We can talk about your thoughts, but until it's on paper, um, we're not seeing that.
No,
Um,
I love that you said that. Just be the idea. I always tell people I can't edit anything that's not on paper. Like y'all got to get out of your head onto the paper as
yes,
sloppy as it needs to be and get it into some form. Then the chair can work with you. But if you don't have anything done, and then don't get mad at us. That's always what I always say. It's like it's not their fault. Nobody can help. Nobody's gonna write it for you. At least in our program, nobody's writing your dissertations. You got to do that part.
yes, absolutely. And I think writing is a really personal thing. And then when that
Yeah,
comes up to deadlines and you haven't been able to do it because you're in your head or you're thinking that the activities, I know people who have spent so many hours, weeks, months, longer, unfortunately,
yeah,
looking at articles, thinking about ideas and not putting it on the page. And then they see these deadlines, and all of a sudden, we got to go, go, go. I'm not in your head.
Happens every time. Good gosh.
So
Yep.
I'm over here at the starting block, and you're like, half a mile down here. I'm going to disappoint you every time. I have to be on that road with you because I take great pride in not bringing folks to a defense that I am not wholly confident will be
Indeed.
nothing but a celebration. And I want people to feel that way. I want my colleagues to trust and believe that I can make sense of a research project. And I think that your research is important enough that we need to honor it and give you, this should be dedicated time where we're focused on nothing but how do we refine this?
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're not going to have plenty of edits, but how do we refine it? Or how do we celebrate these findings and make those final tweaks so that this is something that can be publishable in another way? But you have to come to the table being prepared that your advisor is going to support because they have all of the information that they need.
Yeah. I
Your
hope you.
advisor does not want surprises.
No, they don't. And I hope people that are watching this will be, taking that into consideration as you're thinking through this process. Like no surprises, and it's all about communication. I say that's the most important word to get through this process, just communication and talk about expectations. Like you mentioned, like
Yes.
don't come to me with last minute stuff because that's not how I work. And you wouldn't have known that if we just talk about the expectations that we have for each other. And I think that's an unspoken, sometimes unspoken expectations, and that's when I see things go wrong in the process.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
and
there are
so
things that I wouldn't naturally just come up with. And if a student has said, this is something that can help me, I might not always be the person who is facilitating that for you, but I
yeah,
am happy to find the resource that you need. For example, I'm not a copy editor.
yeah,
I want to make sure that you have the resources that you need, though, because the worst thing ever is you've written and you put your heart out on the page and we can't get through it because we've spent so much time focused on the copy editing. That feels awful. So let's get those pieces out of the way so we can really hone in on that content. But there's no way around it. It has to get done.
yeah. So I hope y'all taking this advice, get the support, work with your chair to get everything that you need. And so what I do want to touch on, of course, advice for doc students, but then now you're doing your research, and in particular around academic integrity, because I want to touch on this. And this we talked about this before, the show, and I was just very interested, and I hadn't thought about it until you brought up to me of how this idea right now, at the time of this recording, you're seeing this explosion in conversation around AI and around, in particularly like Chat GPT and its role in like now it's kind of figuring out what's its role in higher education, what's the role of AI in terms of how students are going to approach their research and
Mhm.
writing moving forward. And when you brought up as an issue of academic integrity, I was like, oh, that's a great blend. I hadn't really thought about it in that lane, which it is. But I
Mhm.
think a lot of faculty are behind because this conversation has been happening a long time ago, but now it's kind of like we're here and people are like,
Mhm.
oh, wait a minute, something. And who knows, at this point, students might be ahead of faculty and maybe already been sliding papers through that have already been, used with these types of systems. And so I
Mhm.
would love to get your thoughts on like what we should be thinking about in higher ed around AI and like its role for us.
Absolutely. So I guess there are two pieces. So if you're a student, I think it's most important to remember that you are investing in this credential that demonstrates your role as an independent researcher. And being an independent researcher requires you to be able to critically make sense of a problem, develop something to be researched, and teach us something from that using a given frame, right? That's the goal. And so, whether or not you use these tools, if you are not able to do that as a skill independently, you will have trouble defending the concept because it won't be that thing that you've added to the conversation, right? It'll be something that you picked up algorithmically. Um, whether you're faculty or students, we have been using AI for longer, much longer than most people think. You are paying attention to algorithms even when you use Google Scholar, right? However, you're comfortable maybe putting in your literature review that you use Google Scholar as one of the ways that you have done some literature searches, for example, right? But there's an algorithm that is based on the things that you normally search, perhaps publications that you've been a part of that make decisions for you that you are not aware of. There are other softwares. Some of you have heard of Connected Papers, Research Rabbit, and those things also create these visual diagrams. But the key is, where's your independent voice in that? And so rather than focus on here's how we're going to stop this, like, you're not going to stop it. If you used Outlook today, there were predictive analytics that would allow us to decide if you should, the way that you should close the email. And everyone's seen
I
that.
hate that on Gmail. Like, it tells me the next 3 words I should write in my sentence. I can't stand it. But yeah,
it's
you're
all
right.
They're making those decisions, right? But are those your words? How many times have you looked and said, that is not what I want to say? And so you delete. I understand the need to feel like you are getting this assistance. So some of my work is in what's called contract cheating. And that's when we hire people to write our papers for us, right? Okay. We recognize people writing papers for you is bad. What a lot of folks don't know is that these businesses for years have also had options where you could get a machine to write those papers for you, and it would come at a lesser cost. Still bad. The idea that a third party has generated the content for you is bad. I'm actually the editor of the SAGE Student Success Project for Academic Integrity and Referencing. And so if you have questions about this, it's a huge library resource that folks can look to better understand kind of what our responsibility is. But you have to decide, is this something I would feel comfortable with my institution knowing, with my advisor knowing? Is this something I'd feel comfortable saying that I used as a resource as a part of my process? And if it gives you pause, ask yourself why. Because if you're really using it as this tool because you feel like it will help you to make sense of a topic, which I encourage you to try it. Keep in mind, if an item is free, then you are the product. And so they are gaining information from you, and we give information every day, right? So that doesn't always feel like a big deal. But you are getting an algorithmic interpretation of things that you put in. So if you put your problem statement in, not only have you given your problem statement to a model for natural language processing, for example, but you are asking it to make those connections. Now, whether it makes connections that include voices of folks who share your experience, folks who advocate for the things that you advocate for, includes this idea of who we are in academic community to serve and what our responsibility is, that's a different question. And you won't know because you don't know the algorithm. And so if you choose to use this as an organizational tool, I strongly suggest that you have a conversation with your chair, for example, understand what the policies are. I have a policy and have had one that states quite clearly, if you want to use these tools, like, let's talk about how to use the tools. But if you look up papers and you just cite those things, you don't know if those folks were just friends, if somebody was trying to get as many publications as possible and they just kept citing themselves. You have no idea that context. And so the glue that natural language processing and any AI tool doesn't provide is your voice. Yep. So what I'm going to ask is, why do you feel like this would be helpful? And there are plenty of reasons for it to be helpful. These are not tools that are going away. They're getting better and better. But then I'm going to ask, what does this description mean for the way that you present this information, right? Because the description now is no longer yours. The description is something that you generated. And so if it affirms something, great. we should be able to acknowledge that, right?
Yeah.
But if it doesn't have, someone who is foremost cited in a certain area, you have to wonder, what else am I missing?
Yeah, like I
I
told
don't,
you,
I
we
think,
talked about this before, like a paper in my
yeah.
own area that I know I'm the leading researcher on. I typed it in just to see what it would, if it would write a literature review about Black male adult learners in higher education, and my work was not anywhere in that paper, in that couple of paragraphs. So yeah, you're right. It does bring up consequences, like who are they citing? What's that process? What's that algorithm look like to actually select people to, be cited, if you will?
And most of it post 2020, there's not a whole lot of information. We're providing that information right now.
Yeah.
So hopefully it'll catch up, right? I think the biggest thing also is for our folks who are doing such important work around identity, around affirmation of identity, um, supporting students, leaders, educators of color. You have to recognize that this is math. And so if you've been underrepresented in the literature, and you're saying things like, I am centering these voices.
Yeah.
The algorithm doesn't adjust to your centeredness.
Mm.
That is your voice. And so in what ways do you now calibrate to become more reliable? Because if you've relied on that, you've given some of your intellectual property away. Is it defendable?
Mm.
If you can't speak to it other than what was written on there, again, like, that trust breaks down. And what I want more than anything is for all of us to win, because you're able to share your ideas through the lenses of these other pieces. And, Grammarly is AI,
Yeah.
right? It uses algorithms to be able to determine if you're speaking positively, if you're engaging, if you're academic, if you've got grammar concerns. This can be helpful. But with that, if we're trusting these things to be the answer, then we're giving so much of what we have to say away. There are consequences to that. And I just want folks to think critically about what those consequences can be, in the same way that I will never tell a student, actually, this is exactly what you need to say, because it's not my dissertation.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that you are not allowing a language processing model to make those decisions for you, because then we're doing what you came into these programs to avoid, which is the fact that so many folks are not represented in the research, that we don't understand the best practices and best supports for students. And if we do not pay attention to the things that we say need refinement, need additional conversation, have gaps, although I don't like to delve into that. That's a different conversation. But if we really want to add to the conversation, then we have to kind of get past that mathematical decision making and make sure that what is on the page um, is our authentic voices.
No, I love that. And I think that's a great way to kind of, for folks as they're watching, to think about this in this role of like, what if they're considering using, well, I mean, we use AI in all sorts of aspects of life at this point, but it's just a matter of like, where's the line and where's the blur between, your voice being removed. And that's the thing that, like you said, we're so, we get into a lot of these programs to be the new voice. And so now I had a machine generate my voice. And that's what the thing that I always said, it's like tone deaf. Like in the when I read them, like, this sounds just very polished, something I would not say in that particular way. But the interesting thing is, I wonder, and it's probably you could do this, the more people put into these in processing, and then in particular types of vernacular, now it can become smarter at maybe talking in a particular way. That's why I'm always curious to see how people end up using this moving forward, in terms of like, oh, I want to talk, like, I want African American vernacular English, and so maybe explain this way, or like, folks might
That
think,
can get so messy.
yeah, and then like, well,
Yes,
who taught it how to
it
do
is.
it? Whose language are they really learning? That type of stuff.
And then what is the mathematical summary of someone's position that looks like me, what does that sound like?
Yeah.
How is that chosen? We have to ask ourselves. We weren't a part of those conversations. You want to get into that? I highly suggest that you do it. We use these things, whether it's fraud alerts from your bank, whether it's grammar check, whether it's Grammarly, like we use these things, but avoid and also there are folks who are trying to do watermarks and surveillance apps and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But really trust your gut. Like, am I saying what I wanted to say? Why do I need this to help me? The thing is, these were originally designed for marketing, right? And marketing words things in such a way so that a reader can quickly say, okay, I have a return on my investment. I took this time, I took these 30 seconds, like TikTok, right? And now you've sold me whatever it is, the supplement or a recipe or something like that. I feel satisfied. I get this, small dopamine hit. I feel good. That does not work the same way with academic writing because you're not writing for that reader's return on investment. You are writing to answer a research problem that is grounded in something that you have expertise in.
Yeah, and you're supposed to generate new knowledge. So how can you generate new knowledge if someone else generated it for you? So that's always where I leave things, kind of like with folks like, well, it doesn't make any sense to have them do it for
Exactly.
you.
If they're putting together your lit review, then what story have you told?
Yeah.
It's when we think about secondary sources, we don't use secondary sources because it's someone else's description of the story,
Yeah.
right? I wouldn't turn in someone else's summary of an essay. So why would it be okay
Yeah.
to do that? And I think in my research, what I've seen is that folks reach for that because they don't have that confidence. They're dealing with anxiety. There are a lot of pressures. They feel like maybe they haven't gotten what they've paid for. And they're ready to move on to the next step. This is what is marketed and justifies why folks do what they do with regard to using these things in ways that are not ethical. But what I would offer is those both things can be true. You can choose to be unethical and you can be in a bad experience. But the question is, why don't you deserve to advocate for a better experience, get the resources that you need so that when you graduate, you're able to move on to that next thing with confidence? Because you've started an agenda that was built on a story that you've created.
Yeah, I
We
love that.
need those stories.
No, for sure. And what I want to do is, as we wrap up, because I think this is a really great conversation, and I want folks to reach out to you because I know you consult with colleges and universities around these issues around academic integrity. And so, how can folks, if they're interested in working with you, learn more about what you do, and how can they reach out to you?
Absolutely. Feel free to visit me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I'm Parnther C. But also emailing my St. John's
We'll have it in the show
information
notes.
is
Yeah,
available.
we'll have it in the notes.
Happy to leave all of that. But yes, I'm happy to have any conversations about these topics at any time. I'm working with different institutions, just thinking about how we make sense of these policies, and I'd love to hear what you think as especially as students.
Yeah.
How you feel about these things, what you think is fair, because if we're a community of trust, right, how do we make sure we're getting your authentic voice, but also making sure that you feel like you have those supports? And not every institution has the same resources, but that doesn't mean that your voice is any less valuable. So yes, would love to continue the conversation. And I'm so thankful to have been able to share with you today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parnther. I'm going to put you behind the scenes for a sec while I wrap up the show. But if you all need support in this area, definitely reach out to Dr. Parnther. Thank you all so much for watching this episode of From ABD to PhD Show. And if you are listening to this on the audio experience, please give us a 5 stars and drop a comment in about what you took away from today's episode. Again, I'm your host, Dr. Ramon Goings, founder of Done Dissertation, where we demystify the dissertation process so that doctoral students can write and defend their dissertation proposal or final defense in the next 4 months. If you're a doctoral student and you need support to get through, or you're a family member of a doctoral student and you are tired of them complaining about not being done, here's what I want you to do. I want you to send them to www.velocitydissertation.com to teach them and let them learn more about our program, and they can apply to work with us so we can help them get their dissertation done. And again, I look forward to seeing you all on the next week's episode. And thank you all so much and have a great week. Take care.